Gello. Tonight's a chance for all of you to settle in and gather together for a real treat. If you're like me, it's been all too long since someone sat down and read you a story. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen tonight. I want to thank author Kingman for her permission and Robert Natti for doing the honors and reading to us. So without further ado, here's Robert Natti.
This story that I'm about to read was written by Kingman in 1948, and it's really about, the background is taken from Lanesville, and it's about my family, but all the rest is made up. Christmas is coming. Christmas is coming. Erkki Seppälä sang the words aloud as he walked along the dark street, but the thoughts of Christmas made him so burstingly happy inside that even his little out-loud song sounded thin and cold in the winter evening. Why did Christmas always make him feel so warm and excited? Was it the presents? Was it the star and the tree at the church? Or the Santa Claus who asked if he had been a good boy? Or was it because all the family were home and they had such a happy time together? Erkki began running to keep warm. The road went up the hill from the sea, and the freshly salted wind rushed all around him, pushing at him. But with Christmas coming, Erkki didn't mind the cold. The wind pushed him on faster and faster until he was racing it. Up the hill they flew. At the top, Erkki stopped and turned around. The wind was so strong, it shut his eyes for a minute. Then he looked out toward the ocean. The sea was cold gray blue, but there was just a bit of color to draw a line around the hills across Ipswich Bay where the sun had set. The sky was a great dark place, and there was the first star winking in it. It was a tiny, faraway light that didn't seem half so real to Erkki as the big silver tinsel star that they would put on top of the Christmas tree. But now that Erkki saw the star in the sky, he made a wish, as he had done every night since Thanksgiving. Christmas is coming. Please, let it be the best one I've ever had. Even as he said the words, the wind threw them away. He turned quickly and ran home. The Seppälä farmhouse looked as if it were trying to cuddle down among the apple trees and hide from the winter gales that howled in from the Atlantic Ocean. Erkki flung open the door to the back kitchen that was used for storeroom in winter and stamped in. The dogs jumped to meet him, and he had to play with them before he could take off his boots. He hung his coat and cap on a peg and went to open the door to the kitchen, the center of everything for the Seppäläs that winter. He knew just how it would look. There was a big table covered with red check cloth where they were gathered for meals. The steamy windows were as gay as Christmas wreaths with their red checked curtains to match the tablecloth. In a corner by the huge black coal stove were two rocking chairs. They were always busy. Mother or father would be sitting there, or one of the older girls holding a younger child to be fed or comforted or rocked to sleep. And sometimes the younger ones climbed in by themselves to sit stiff-legged, boots just sticking beyond the edge of the chair, hands clutching the arms, rocking their bodies until they set the chair rocking too. Erkki knew that the kitchen would be full of the homey smell of baking bread or pies or the friendly smell of stew. It was always full of people, too, even when it was just the family. There were Mother and Father Seppälä, tall, grown-up Natti, who burst home from a trip on the stone barge as if he'd missed every minute with his family, slender, blonde Saima, who worked in a pastry shop in Gloucester, then round-faced, laughing Mikko, who had left school now that he was 16, so he could work too, and serious, quiet Eili, who was a big help to Mother now that she was 12. Then came Erkki, who was 10 whole years behind him, felt much, much older than his 7-year-old brother Arnie. The twins Elena and Eino were 5 and noisy. Laurie, who was 3, was learning to keep out of everyone's way, but Anna, the baby, knew only that if she yelled loud enough with a strong year-old voice, after a while, someone would see what she wanted. When they were all laughing or talking or singing at once, it was like being at a party. But tonight, when Erkki opened the door with "Christmas is coming" singing on his lips, the room was full of people and very quiet. Mother was sitting in a rocking chair with her hands over her eyes, and Father was patting her shoulder. Eily and Sima had their arms around each other and were crying. The younger children knew something was wrong. They were still and staring. Even Mikko's usual smile was gone. "What's the matter?" asked Erkki. "Matti Stonebarge must be in trouble. She should have come into Boston 2 days ago," Mikko explained, "but she's missing." The Stonebarge was a large boat which carried big pieces of granite from Cape Ann to Boston or New York. It sailed so slowly that the trip from Gloucester to Boston took several days. Matti said he'd be home in 3 or 4 days, and that would be the last trip until spring, Mother said. Erkki didn't want to believe it, not his big brother Matti, who told such wonderful stories, not with Christmas coming. He said he'd be home for Christmas, was all Erkki could say. How empty and quiet the house was without Matti, even when all the Seppolas were together in the kitchen. Supper was the stillest meal Erkki had ever known because no one felt like saying a word. After supper, Mother and Father sat in their chairs by the stove and rocked and rocked. Eily and Sima washed and wiped the dishes in the tiny sink room off the kitchen, while Erkki and Ani carried them to the cupboards and put them away. This was a time when Mother usually did her knitting. With 10 children in the family, she didn't have time to knit more than 1 pair of mittens a year for each of them, so she gave the mittens to them at Christmas. The children never asked who the mittens were for, even though they watched each one grow. Some had stripes of bright colors, and some had little patterns, and of course some were big and some were small. The surprise came on Christmas Eve when they took their presents off the tree to see which pair of mittens belonged to each other. Mother would hang them on the tree with a name hidden under a gay bow of yarn. In the thumb of each mitten was a shiny dime from Father. And last year, Sam had saved some of her money and bought a candy cane to put in each mitten. It made a very colorful tree with such bright presents for ornaments. But Erkki saw that his mother wasn't knitting tonight. When Laurie came and pushed his head against her knees, she picked him up and rocked him as if she was trying to keep all children, big and small, safe in her arms. Erkki's thoughts kept returning over and over to Christmas. Would they have a Christmas if Matti didn't come home? He couldn't wait any longer without knowing. "When are you going out in the woods to find a Christmas tree?" he asked Father. "Why, it's almost Christmas, isn't it?" Father seemed surprised. How could grown-ups be so quiet about Christmas when children waited all year for it? Let's see. Christmas is just 2 weeks from tomorrow. He ruffled Erkki's blonde hair until it looked like a pile of beach straw. "Perhaps you and Mikko could go with me the Saturday before Christmas." Erkki's face shone with a smile. They would have a tree, and he would find it. He knew just what they wanted, a hemlock with tiny brown cones hidden in the green branches. Mother stopped rocking, and Laurie's head flopped forward as he slept. "Why go to all that trouble?" she asked Father. "Without Matti, it just won't be Christmas." Erkki's thought stopped right where he heard Mother say trouble. Was Christmas a trouble to anyone? He always thought everyone was happy at Christmas, from the time of lighting the first candle for the window on Christmas Eve to blowing it out when they went to bed Christmas night. Why, Christmas was wonderful. What was trouble about it? The other children must have been listening too, because they crowded around the stove. Arnie's big blue eyes stared hard at Mother. "No tree?" he whispered. Elena's mouth was open, ready to cry loudly. Enos said firmly the question he had asked 100 times a day anyway, but now it was important. Why? Mother looked at them all, each one waiting for her to decide an important thing. Erkki saw that Mikko had stopped trying to mend his slate, and Aili and Simon were listening too. I guess I forgot what Christmas means, said Mother. It wouldn't feel right not to have Christmas, would it? Oh, no. Smiles began to grow again. Right on the page here. Of course we'll have a Christmas and a tree. Mother was smiling again herself, and we hope Matti's boat will be found by then, and he'll be home. She handed Laurie to Sima and reached into the knitting bag, which was always hung on the back of a chair, bumping softly as she rocked. Out came a pair of mittens, and her fingers flashed away, red yarn, blue yarn, over and over. Eric yawned. The cold walk to the beach before supper made him sleepy. He went upstairs to bed, and his last awake thought was, Christmas is coming. But when he awoke, shivering with cold the next morning, the little Christmas is coming song in his head was followed by another thought. If Matti didn't come back home, there wouldn't be any big presents. For 3 years since Matti had worked on the stone barge, he bought the kind of presents that made Christmas exciting. Not that Erkki didn't mind Mother's warm mittens and Father's shiny dimes. He knew that with 10 children to clothe and feed and keep warm, Mother and Father couldn't buy them toys and games. Mother often said at Christmas, you know, our biggest package for each of you is our love. But Matti bought his brothers and sisters the present each one wanted most. Toy wagons and sleds and games and dolls. The only toys they ever had came from Matti, and this year there might not be any. How disappointed the children would be. Matti found out what each one wanted, and Erkki said a new sled big enough to stay under him when he went coasting. The sled he had just about took care of his stomach. How was it possibly going to be the best Christmas Erkki ever had? As he shivered in bed, he decided not to look forward to Christmas at all. He didn't even want to crawl out of his nest of blankets and get dressed. Erkki, for the first time since Thanksgiving, Mother had to call him up to get up. How cold it was in his unheated room. The sun wasn't shining. It was gray, wet, cold, nasty day. He ate his breakfast without saying much, and at school his mind wasn't in the room at all. After school, he kicked a chunk of ice ahead of him all the way home and didn't stop to look at the ocean once. Instead of hanging up his coat and cap, he dropped them on the floor of the storeroom. What was the point in bothering? He kicked the cap into the far corner just as Mother came in with a basket of eggs. Erkki, she said, that cap won't last you another year if you don't take better care of it. Erkki shrugged his shoulders. I don't care. Christmas is coming, Mother reminded him. Yes, said Erkki, but it won't be very good this year without Matti. Erkki. Mother put the eggs down carefully and turned Erkki around until he had to look at her. She couldn't scold. Each of them had such a weight in his heart about Matti. She knew too how the children counted on his presence. Even if Matti doesn't come home, we'll have a good Christmas somehow. Do you know why? Erkki shook his head. Because Matti would like it. He's a sort of special Christmas spirit for all of us. We'll do the things he'd like, and perhaps he'll be here anyway. Mother's voice was strong with hope and faith. Now go hang up your coat and cap and then come in and have some hot milk. As Erkki bent over to pick up his cap, he saw that it had landed on some boards he had never noticed before. Behind the boards were two little wooden wheels that looked as if they had come from a child's wagon. What could they be doing there? Unless... Suddenly, Erkki had an idea. It was such an exciting idea that he gulped down his milk without waiting for it to cool. "Oh," he spluttered, "I think I blistered my throat. I'm going out and cool it off." He dashed into the storeroom and started to pick up the wheels and boards when Arnie came in. "What are you doing?" asked Arnie. Erkki knew that if he said anything interesting, Arnie would have to see all about it, so he just said, "Carrying some wood out to the barn. Want to help?" "No." Arnie skipped away quickly. Erkki hugged his armful of wood and wheels and hurried into the barn. There was the big workbench, where Father made things for the house and repaired tools. It was almost dark, but Erkki knew how to light the kerosene lamp and hang it safely out of the way. He spread out the pieces. There were the two wheels, the long shaft with a cross piece for a handle, and an old broomstick with ends whittled small to fit the holes in the middle of the wheels. Erkki grinned happily. They were just what he needed to make a wagon for Arnie for Christmas. Natti must have been planning to make it. Erkki reached for a hammer and began nailing wooden pieces together to make a box. He whistled softly as he worked and didn't notice how cold his feet were growing. The workbench was at the other end of the barn from the stall where the cow was munching a cud, with her warm breath steaming out into the cold room. Erkki was so excited that he hammered his fingers in his hurry to see how the box would look. Before long, there it was. The edges were a little rough, but Erkki knew how to scrape them smooth. It took him a long time to figure out how to fit the wheels onto the broomstick so they would turn without falling off. Maybe it wasn't quite what Natti intended, but when Erkki finished, he was very proud. The box fitted on the stick between the wheels. All he had to do was fasten it tight and put the long handle on the front. As he finished, he heard Mother calling him to supper. How could he ever keep from telling them what he had been doing? And where could he hide the wagon so Arnie wouldn't find it? The light from the kerosene lamp shone on the wisps of hay falling over the edge of the loft, and soon Erkki noticed them. He carried the wagon up the ladder. Tucked under the hay, no one would know it was there at all. He would paint it, and there would be a Christmas present for Arnie. Erkki put out the lamp and began whistling the little "Christmas is Coming" tune, which had been in his head. Even his whistle had a secret sound as he closed the barn door. There was a first star up in the sky, but Erkki didn't have time to stop and wish for the best Christmas he ever had. "Where have you been, Erkki?" Arnie wanted to know as he came into the kitchen. "Just out," said Erkki, but his face suddenly put on such a large grin that he had to bite his tongue to keep from laughing. Erkki took himself and his secret to bed early because it kept popping up in his mind, and he did want to talk about it. But before he went to sleep, he tried to think of all the things the children had said they wanted and how he could make them. He didn't have money to buy anything. He would have to find red paint for the wagon and some wood to make a little train. And how could he ever make a doll for Elena? Girls would want something hard to make like that. But if Natti could do it, Erkki could. The days to Christmas came rushing at Erkki so quickly that he had little time to whistle "Christmas is Coming." He hunted around to see if Natti had left any more hints of things he planned to make, but he couldn't find any. He had to hunt for paint, too. He found just enough to do the wagon wheels red, but there was a lot of black paint, so he painted the box with that. The wagon looked very handsome, with its shiny black body and red wheels, like a little quarry engine that pulled the stone cars. But he ought to have some gold curlicues to be like the Indians. So Erky found some yellow paint and a small brush and painted very swoopy curlicues all around the top of the box. And since all Indians have names, he wrote Granite Express. The letters were a little wobbly, but the name was grand. Erky was so afraid that Annie would find the present while the paint was drying that he spent most of his time in the barn to shoo Annie away. Annie, however, was hurt by all Erky's secret hurrying and scurrying. When Erky came into the storeroom at dark, he would hear Annie complaining to Mother in the kitchen. "I'm too big to play with the little ones, Mother," he said, and Erky won't let me play with him at all." "Erky seemed to be very busy," said Mother. "Yesterday, he grabbed one of those round oatmeal boxes away from me," said Eily. "He just shook it to see if it was empty, and then he walked off with it. I was only going to throw it away." Erky in the dark storeroom chuckled. The oatmeal box was going to be very useful. "And what was he going through your scrap bag for, Mother?" Simon asked. "He told Mikko asked him to find cleaning rags for his gun, and he had some pieces from my old velvet jacket and some embroidered stuff." Erky put his hands over his mouth so he wouldn't laugh out loud. "Wouldn't they all be surprised?" "I didn't ask him for any rags," Mikko said. My, Mother sounded surprised, but pleased. "Erky is being even more mysterious than Natti at Christmas." With Natti's name, a silence pushed into the room. When Erky came into the kitchen, they all looked worried. "It's 10 days now, isn't it?" asked Eily, "since the stone barge was missing." Mother sat down heavily in her rocking chair, but Anna came bumping over the floor and held out her arms. So Mother picked her up and rocked her while the older girls put supper on the table. When Father came home, everyone looked up and asked the same question without saying it out loud. Father shook his head. Next morning, Father opened the door to Erky's little room and says, "Come on, get up. We're going to the woods." Eric said sleepily, "What for?" "For the Christmas tree." Erky jumped out of bed. Was it that close to Christmas already? Only 4 more days to Christmas Eve? As he pulled on his clothes, he listed the things in his mind that he had finished: Annie's wagon, and toys for the twins, and Laurie and Anna. And he hadn't thought of anything at all for Eily and Mikko and Sima, and most of all, Mother and Father. Natti would be sure to have something for all of them. While Erky ate his oatmeal, Mikko and Father were sharpening the axe on the grindstone. He could hear the whining sound it made. As soon as he finished, he slapped on his cap and dashed out the door. "Erky, come back," called Mother. "Don't you know how cold it is outdoors?" Standing still long enough to find out, Erky realized that the air made the end of his nose tingle and his ears prickle. The winter wind shoved right through his jacket as if it couldn't wait to go around him. He stuck his hands in his pockets and said, "It's not cold." "Come back." Mother pulled him inside the storeroom door. "Here's an old winter shirt, and here's a scarf to tie around the neck. And here," she reached for the knapsack packed with sandwiches and hung it on his back. "How grown up you look with that knapsack." In spite of the large shirt flapping around his knees, Erky marched happily out to join the Christmas tree hunters, and off they went. The first light snowfall of the year had been tossed aside by the wind and melted by the sun. Only the shaded hollow of the woods still held snow. The ground was clear and hard. They walked quickly, for it was 4 or 5 miles from the Sipler house to the wild and lonely stretch of land on top of Cape Ann called Dogtown Common. Erky had to take long strides to keep up, and no one talked. If he opened his mouth, the air rushing down his throat was too cold to swallow. By the time they came out of the woods at the edge of Dogtown, his head was pounding, and he had to gasp for breath. Father looked at Eric in surprise. I was thinking about last year when Natti came with me, and I forgot you haven't the longest legs in the family. Father hugged the boy close to him. Why didn't you tell us to stop a minute? Eric couldn't say anything, but he grinned. He was so proud of not asking them to stop. Mikko said, we better not stop all of a sudden now. Just keep on walking slower. Now's the time to look for hemlocks, Father reminded them. So they walked on, keeping near the woods and searching for a good tree. There's one, cried Erky. Now he had his breath again. So there is, said Father. Let's see if it's good all the way around. Erky ran around the tree, which was taller than he was. One side has only a few branches on it, he reported, and there aren't many little cones. On they went, until at last they found a perfect tree about 10 feet high with lots of tiny brown cones. Now, said Father, let's eat our lunch, then we'll cut down the tree. In the shelter of a large rock, the sunlight took the sting from the winter wind, and they enjoyed the sandwiches Mother had packed in the knapsack. How I wish, Father began, I had more time to spend with you boys in the woods. I'd like to find some apple or cherry branches too, so I could carve some new knife handles. I remember when you always were carving things, said Mikko. You made me a toy boat once. So I did, said Father. But even if I had time to carve now, I wouldn't have time to go to find the wood to begin with. It would be nice, though, Father sighed. I wish you had time to teach me to carve, said Mikko. Erky noticed his father's face in the strong winter sunlight. How old he looked. His face was full of lines Erky had never seen in the lamplight of dark winter mornings or long winter evenings. I'm still a young man, Father went on. Erky stared at him. What a lot of new ideas he had lately. First Christmas was trouble, and now Father said he was still a young man. Did Father still dream about the things he'd like to do, the way Erky did? And did Father still look forward to Christmas? Do you think Christmas is the most important day in the year? Erky asked. Father's blue eyes twinkled. Well, yes, he said. But we never give you any presents. Erky suddenly wondered why Father thought it was important. Oh, yes, you do, Father told him. When I see all of you happy with your eyes shining because your hearts are full of joy, what more could a father ask? I should think you'd want lots of things, Erky said slowly. Father laughed. Wait until you grow up. Besides, Christmas isn't just to get presents. It's a birthday for the Christ child. And it's the spirit of giving that counts. Mikko jumped up impatiently. Let's get this tree cut down and Christmas will be here before we get home. Erky announced, I'll cut down the tree. Oh, Eric, said Mikko, you couldn't even make a dent in it. He picked up the axe and started toward the tree. Wait a minute, said Father. We'll all cut it down. He took the axe and gave it to Erky. Give it a cut. Erky swung the axe as manfully as he could, while Mikko and Father dodged away in a hurry. The blade bit into the tree, and there was a white scar in the trunk. Erky was so excited he didn't mind when Father hastily reached for the axe. He and Mikko took turns. The tree will fall in that clear space, Father says. Erky, come over here. You can give it another blow or two now. Erky whacked with all his strength, and creak, the tree bent slowly toward the clearing. With another whack and a louder creak, it fell over. Good, said Father. Now, if Erky will take the knapsack, Mick and I will carry the tree. They lifted it carefully. A few of the cones fell off, and Erky picked them up without thinking very much of what he was doing. As he followed Father and Mikko through the woods, he made a game of picking up more cones as they fell, until his knapsack held quite a few. "We'll put the tree in the barn till Christmas Eve," Father says, as they reached home. Erky dumped the pine cones into the workbench. What are you going to do with those?" Mikko asked. "Glue them back on the tree?" Erky laughed. "No, what a silly idea." But his eyes fell on the yellow paint can, and he had a much better idea. "I'll be in later on," he told him. I gotta find it. When Erky woke the next morning, he knew what he would give Father for Christmas. He slipped out of bed and dressed warmly. In the kitchen, he helped himself to the oatmeal Father had cooked all night on the stove. He found the knapsack, and as soon as the sun was really up and about in the sky, he started off. It was so cold that his breath made clouds around him as he walked. But when he came back at noontime and hid the knapsack in the barn, he had Christmas presents for Father and Mikko and Mother. Now he could hardly wait for Christmas to come. It seemed as if Monday and Tuesday would never go by. School was out, and while Erky could have gone coasting with the other boys, or skating, he didn't. There was still no news of the missing stone barge in Natti. The usual joy and excitement which scurried around the Seppala farmhouse in the other years didn't come this year. There seemed to be a frightening stillness in the corners of the kitchen as all the family gathered around the table lamp in the evenings. On Tuesday, the snow fell so heavily that all they could see from the windows were whirling flakes. When Erky went out with Father to feed the animals, they could barely make their way from house to barn, except for the lonely cries of the foghorn warning ships from the rocks in the blinding storm. Everything was so still and silent that Erky shivered. "It feels as if everything is waiting for something." "We are," said Father. "We are." If only Natti would come home safely. Even in the kitchen, with the tea kettle whispering steamily on the stove, the sound of the foghorn seemed to fill the whole room. But late in the afternoon, the storm stopped. The sky cleared, and all the Seppalas pelted out of the house to stretch and run before supper. As they watched, the sun began to sink over Ipswich Bay, and the snow-shining hills gleamed with such a brightness that they could hardly look. Mother stood in the doorway. Her worried look was gone. "A sunset like that must mean something," she said. When Erky awoke the next morning, he had almost forgotten that it was a day before Christmas. He lay in bed for a minute trying to figure out how he could put the presents from Natti under the tree to surprise everyone when they came back from church. Then he remembered he had to go to church himself to speak a piece with the other children. "Mother," he asked as he ate his breakfast, "do you think it would be all right if I didn't go to church and say my piece?" "Why, Erky!" Mother turned around so quickly to look at him that she knocked a pan off the stove. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes," he said, "but I thought maybe I could stay home and take care of things while you went. Keep the stove going, and the stove will last that long by itself," said Mother. "And we'll all trim the tree before we go to church." She looked at Erky again sharply. "Haven't you learned your piece?" Erky's face grew even longer. He started to learn it before he got the idea for Natti's present, but he couldn't even remember the first line. "Oh," he groaned, "I don't know it at all." "I thought so," said Mother. "It's in your Sunday school book, isn't it?" She found his harping in, which taught the sounds of the Finnish language, which they spoke at home and in church. It had stories and poems and Sunday school pieces in it. Erkki sat in the corner all morning until he could shut his eyes tight and whisper the words out loud all the way through. I think I know all your pieces better than you do, Mother said. After lunch, she put the little ones upstairs for a nap, while the older ones took a steam bath in the sauna. By the time the sun stretched out its long, late afternoon shadows, the whole family were washed and dressed in their clean, best clothes. The kitchen was sweet with the smell of baking coffee bread and mince and squash pie. When the sun set and the darkness crept in across the sea, they all went into the kitchen. Erkki took the white candle Mother handed him, and after Mick helped him melt one end and set it in a saucer, he lit it and gave it to Annie to sit in the kitchen window. It was a brave little light, flickering against the steamy window panes. Erkki found himself thinking of the wishes he made on the first evening star. Oh, please, he begged him inside himself, make this the best Christmas I've ever had. Let Natti come home. Suddenly, Mikko tipped back his head and started singing. They all joined in, until the kitchen seemed to whirl with the happy sounds and delicious smells from the oven. Erkki felt his heart beat faster. It was beginning to feel like Christmas after all. One by one, following Father with Mother carrying Anna, they marched out the kitchen door, grabbing up coats and scarves as they passed through the storeroom and out to the barn. Father and Erkki lifted up the Christmas tree while Mikko led them in an extra loud, extra joyful chorus for the pleasure of the cow and horse. Then Father and Erkki carried the tree so carefully that not a tiny cone dropped off. Into the living room they took it while Mikko ran back to the barn for a pail of sand. Then they stuck the tree trunk in the bucket and pushed the tree up tall and straight. Oh, cried Annie, the top branches just touches the roof. Where's the star? Cried Eileen. The girls took a chair into the closet so they could reach the box of ornaments Matti usually lifted down. There's a star, Erkki says. Father stood on a chair to slip its wire over the top of the tree. The tinsel of the star was a little tired after several years of use, but to Erkki it was bigger and prettier than any star in the sky. Mother came in with the 10 pairs of mittens and quietly around the tree, hanging them here and there. None of the children would think of looking to see whose mittens were whose until they came back from church. Sima came in with a paper bag full of candy canes and put one in each mitten, while Father was busy poking his tiny dimes into the thumbs. Eily and Mikko took out the strings of paper chains the children had made last year, and the twins and Arnie and Erkki hung them on the tree. There were milkweed pods, too, that Eily had painted silver. They shone softly in the lamplight. The only decoration the Sepulers had ever bought was a star at the top of the tree. When they finished, they stepped back to look. It's lovely, children, said Mother. Father cleared his throat and then didn't say anything. Mikko kicked his boots together and whistled softly. Annie and the twins and Laurie didn't say much. They just looked at the star and the tree. But Erkki knew they were all thinking about their Christmas was all on the tree now. Matti wasn't there to surprise them all with presents. He would sneak under the tree while they were at church. Erkki wanted to grin because of his secret, but no one seemed to be smiling. They would rather have had Matti there without presents than all the presents in the world. Oh, Mother said suddenly, we'll have to hurry. Oh, we'll be late for church. Outside the front door, Father had lined up 2 big double-runner sleds. Mikko, you pull one and take the twins and Laurie. I'll take Annie and Erky and Eily on the other. The soft snow flew into their faces as father and Mikko started pulling, but once they were on the street, the road was well packed down by pungs and sleighs. Mother carried Anna under one arm as she and Simon followed the sleds. When they came to the top of the hill, Father called, "Shall we coast to church?" Mother laughed. "How else do you think you could get those sleds down the hill without coasting? It's not very dignified, but it's Christmas Eve." That was all Father and Mikko needed. With a push, they were off down the hill, and the wind carried their laughing shouts back to Mother and Saima, who followed. In Finland, when I was a girl, Mother said, the church was on the other side of the lake and the road was long and hard, so we always went to church in a boat. When they reached the bottom of the hill, they saw that Father had turned into the schoolyard and stopped in a snowbank. Annie and Erky says, "Let's go back and do it again. We've got plenty of time." "No," said Mother. "Straighten up and let me brush the snow from your coat so you look respectable." "And where are the others?" From another snowbank in the yard came howls. Mother heard to find Laurie red in the face and loudly weeping. "It's just snow down his neck," said Mikko. "You'd think he'd been hurt." With slappings and dustings to dust off the snow, the Seppala family gathered and walked quietly across the street to the church. Inside, the children hurried to sit in their Sunday school classes at the front, while mothers and fathers settled themselves farther back. Tonight was for children to celebrate the birthday of the Christ child with their songs and pieces. Before, Erky had always enjoyed the Christmas Eve service, but tonight he kept wondering how he could get home first and put the presents around the tree. The smallest one spoke first. Even little Laurie had 2 words to say with a group of others. It made a nice Christmas sentence, but one of the girls stood in the wrong place and said her words at the wrong time, so the sentence was a little mixed up. When Elena's turn came, she stood up and curtsied, folded her hands carefully in front of her so the crocheted edge of her handkerchief could be seen, and sang through her nose a happy sing-song. She bobbed back to her seat, and it was Aino's turn. Aino wore new boots with a squeaking in them. He began to say his piece as he walked to the front of the church from his seat, and most of it sounded just squeak, squeak. By the time he reached the front, his piece was finished, so he bowed and ran back to sit down. Erky squirmed. All the children in the village must have pieces. At last Annie said his in a very loud, slow voice, and when Erky's turn finally came, his mind was on the presents, so they hardly knew he was speaking. The older boys and girls sang special songs. The minister prayed and prayed and prayed. Then everyone sang. Erky thought each hymn had 10 extra verses this year. At last the minister said, "We have a Christmas tree for the children downstairs, and I've heard we might even have a visit from Santa Claus. Shall we all go down and see?" With that, the children burst out of their seats and pelted for the stairs. Mothers and fathers who tried to remind them they were still in church gave up. The rush and noise were just what Erky needed. He hurried to Mikko, who was with a bunch of older boys. "Mikko, I've got to go home. I forgot something. If I'm not back when you're ready to come home, just tell Mother where I am." He found his coat and cap and dashed out before Mikko could ask him any more questions. He ran up the hill until he was panting for breath, and the gentle shove of the wind wasn't strong enough to push him any farther. Except for the Christmas candle glowing at the kitchen window, the house was dark. While Erky fumbled for the door latch, he felt sad. The Santa Claus that church would call Erky Seppala, and Erky wouldn't be there to say he'd been a good boy and take his present of candy. At last the door opened and Erky felt his way into the dark storeroom. Suddenly he had a feeling that someone else in the room with him. There was a special quietness, a darkness about one corner that made it seem alive. But he didn't have time to worry about it. He found the lantern and lit it. Then he ran out to the barn. On his little wagon was still under the hay with the other things he had made. He carried them carefully down the ladder and into the house. In the living room, he knelt by the Christmas tree and put the presents under its branches. He looked at them happily until he remembered that he hadn't put names on any of the presents. Quickly he found paper and pencil and printed them out. He started to write from Natti, but then he was afraid they would think that Natti had come safely home, and it would be awful to find that he hadn't. Yet he didn't write from Erky because he was doing it for his brother. Then he spread out the gifts under the tree and placed the right name on each. If he hurried, he might get back to the church before anyone missed him. He buttoned his coat and ran down the hill so fast that he almost pitched face first into a snowbank when he tried to stop at the bottom. As he slipped into the Sunday school room, he heard the Santa Claus's voice saying, "Not here? Maybe he hasn't been a good boy after all." Erky felt his face turn hot and red, and he hunched up small under his coat. The Santa Claus had always been a big moment in his life until this year. The way he looked at each child clearly in the eye, and his white beard waved solemnly as he asked sternly about being good. Some of the smaller children were usually frightened and screamed until Santa Claus smiled and made his eyes twinkle and handed out the little red stocking filled with hard candies. But there was Mikko clumping up to Santa Claus. The big boys at Mikta's confirmation class hooted at him. There weren't any candy stockings for older boys and girls. "Excuse me," said Mikko. "I'm Erky Seppala's brother. I think he's been a good boy. Could I have the candy for him? He had to leave." "Certainly, certainly." The Santa Claus held a stocking out to Mikko, who tramped back again, blushing hotly. In spite of himself, Erky felt gayer when he heard Mikko ask for the candy. He did hate to miss all the Christmas presents. As the last candy was given out, the Santa Claus slung his now empty grain sack over his shoulder and left with noisy promises to return another year. Parents rounded up bright-eyed children, and took some time before the Seppalas were all collected at one point. Mikko and Father went slowly up the hill this time. The sleds weighted down heavily with children. When they reached the house, the quietness seemed to have come upon them. They stood around uncertainly until at last Father pushed open the door and sent them in. "You'll be cold. Go on in." Erky, standing first at one foot and then on the other, thought they would never go inside. He knew that they were all missing Natti, but he couldn't hardly wait for them to discover the presents. He stepped on Annie's foot and nearly knocked Laurie flat, trying to rush into the living room first. This was the most exciting Christmas he had ever had. As they gathered around the tree, their eyes didn't fall on the gifts tucked under the branches at all. Erky realized that they weren't expecting anything but the usual mittens, and no one felt like looking under the tree for what wasn't there. When Father started taking the mittens off pair by pair and handing them out, saying, "Now here's a beautiful present," Erky could hardly sit still. Then Laurie crawled under the tree and squealed. Erky popped down on his knees to see that he didn't put his hand on the wrong toy and then refused to part with it. In a minute, the whole family was peering under the branches, and the noise of discovery burst out happily. Look at the little train, and the doll, and the wagon. Erky saw his mother straighten up and look hopefully around the room and the others. Where was Natti? In the silence that fell as they wondered, Erky's voice sounded small and lonely. I thought they what Natti would want to do, so they're really from him. You made them? Mother shook Erky lovingly. Oh, Erky, what a happy Christmas you made us. Did you really make this wagon? Arnie wanted to know as he pulled the Granite Express lightly over the carpet. Erky nodded. There was so much noise and excitement, he couldn't think of what to say to anyone. Mother and father had to see each and admire it. There was Arnie's gay wagon and little boy wagon made the same way, but much, much smaller for Ano. Simon laughed when she found the velvet ball with Annie's name on it. Here's my old jacket. She held it out to Anna, who squashed it to herself and hugged it contentedly. Was that what you wanted to borrow a needle and thread for, Erky? He laughed. My fingers are still sore from trying to sew. All I did was stick the needle into them. The rest of the velvet had gone into a handsome dress for Elena's doll. To be sure, it was not a very good doll. The body was made of sticks nailed together so they wouldn't move at all. But the head was made out of a little rubber ball on which Erky had painted a face. And best of all, the doll had a house made of an oatmeal box. Erky had cut spaces for windows and painted a red front door. Elena was already playing house, and Erky could see the rubber doll face staring out of the oatmeal box window. For Laurie, there was the toy train made of blocks of wood with a long string, so Laurie could pull it on journeys. You didn't see your presents, Erky said suddenly. Mother and father and Simon and Eily and Mikko looked surprised. For us too, they asked. Erky handed Eily and Simon little bracelets made of strings of tiny hemlock cones painted yellow. Oh, Erky, they're beautiful, they said. He handed father and Mikko bundles of sticks roughly tied together. These don't look like much, he said, but the apple and cherry branches, so you can do some carving. Say, that's great, said father. I never would have had time to hunt for them myself. Now you can teach me how to carve, said Mikko happily. To mother, Erky handed a glass bowl he had found dusty and deserted at the back of the kitchen cupboard. But in it he had put soft mosses and lichens from the woods and even some partridge berry with the little red berries still clinging brightly on the vine. Mother hugged Erky. It's lovely. We'll put it on the table in the kitchen where everyone can enjoy it all the time. Suddenly, Erky had been poking in back of the tree, called out, Hey, whose sled is this? Sled? Erky turned around quickly to look. He hadn't made any sled, but he had wanted one so badly. Sure enough, Arnie was dragging a handsomely varnished and sparkling flexible flyer from back of the tree. There was a tag tied to the top, and Erky pounced on it. It read, To Erky, from Natti. But how? Began Erky. The door to the hall was suddenly pulled open, and a large and happy young man stood there saying, Merry Christmas, everyone. Natti, Natti, oh, Natti. In a second, he had mother in his arms, and father was clapping him on the back. The children were dancing around with the little ones reaching for his hands and trying to climb his legs. Are you all right? What happened? When did you come home? Where have you been? One at a time, Natti says. They popped mother into a chair and sorted out the children until he could sit down with Laurie and Elena and Ano all in his lap at once. I've just been out to sea, that's all, so I couldn't get a word to you. We were driven off our course after our rudder broke. We drifted for 3 or 4 days, and finally another boat sighted us. She helped tow us back to Boston, but it took a long time to get there. I just came into Gloucester this afternoon. Oh, Natti, said Mother, we know what Christmas really is, to have you home again. It took me a little while to get here from Gloucester, so I just come into the house to surprise you when I realized you were all at church. Then I heard someone come into the storeroom after me, and I thought it was a burglar. So I waited to pounce on him, and it was Erky being very mysterious. I thought someone was there, exclaimed Erky. Anyway, said Natti, you looked as if you were carrying out surprises, so I just watched. After you ran out to church again, I looked at the presents under the tree. You're a wonderful boy, Erky. But everyone stopped at once. Everyone talked at once about Erky, until he couldn't seem to see anything but the copper toes shining on his boots. But you didn't have anything under the tree, so I hid your sled behind it. And I had some fun watching you through the crack in the door. Natti chuckled. I brought a few more things for the kids, because I didn't know I was going to have such a smart boy taking my place. But they're all store-bought, not half as good as the ones Erky made. They're out in the hall. The children scrambled to the hall and brought in the packages. There were games and store dolls and toys, and somehow, grand as they were, the ones that meant the most were the ones Erky had made. You know what? Erky said as he blinked up at the silver tinsel star on the tree. This is the best Christmas I ever had. That's all.
Of course, many of the locations on which the Best Christmas is based can still be seen in Lanesville. Again, I want to extend my most sincere thanks to Lee Kingman and Robert Natti, and to you for watching. We at New England Cablevision wish you a very happy holiday season. I'm Sinica Nogello. Good night.